Well, yesterday, as you walked through the museum, what thoughts came to your mind as you saw not only the artifacts but the plaques and kind of the whole thing about walking through here in Cooperstown?
There was a couple things that I think that I guess struck me or kind of hit home, and I think it was the first thing was the scope of the history of the game. Like I've said, I'm not a historian per se, in that I can recite stats and guys' numbers and years and things of that nature, but I have a pretty good understanding of the game and how it's evolved and what it's meant. But I think that was even probably understated in my mind, having walked through there. When you walk in and do it the way we did yesterday, where it's the start of baseball and then the evolution through the years, the changes in equipment, the changes in uniform, the changes in balls, and then you see, the section where the Negro Leagues and Jackie Robinson starts to come into baseball and how that affected culture, how it affected baseball. So I think for me, when I went through and really got to see firsthand the history of the game, it was a little bit overwhelming, because I think there's, like I said, even though you know it, you don't really know it. There's a lot more details to it. So that was one thing, and I think another thing that struck me as you walk around and you look at some of the exhibits and the guys and their numbers. It's some of those years that guys had, and the numbers are it's mind-boggling. You look at what they did and you just scratch your head and think, oh my God, how did they do that? How did they have that kind of year, that kind of career? So that was humbling in that regard. And then to come in Monument Row here and see all the plaques and see all the great players, and know that in a short period of time, I'm going to have a plaque up there that sits with all these guys. That was really hard to get my head around. It's coming. It's going to be there. But again, it's another one of those moments, and I've had a few of them since I got the phone call in January, where you just find yourself saying, oh my God, this is really happening? How did this happen? And it's just kind of hard to get your hands around it.
When you came across the Braves exhibit from the 90s, I could see you stopped and looked at that. Was it almost looking into a time capsule, or looking back in time for you?
Yeah, it is, because it's more about having those great memories of those years that we had together, of the great teams that we had, the great teammates that I had, the friends that I made, and really just one of those moments where you sit back and reflect, and I don't reflect in a way where I missed the game and, oh gee, I wish I was still playing. It's more of a reflection of appreciation for how blessed I was, how blessed we were, that we had a chance not only to do something we love, but we had a chance to do it with some pretty darn good teams and have a whole lot of fun along the way. So it was more that reflection of appreciation than yearning or wishing I was still doing it.
You think about forks in the road, drafted by both the Braves and the LA Kings in 1984. How close did you come to being a professional hockey player?
I mean, not all that close in the grand scheme of things. It was, I was a senior in high school. The very difficult decision for me was trying to find a college to go to, because I had a number of baseball-only schools recruiting me. I had a number of hockey-only schools recruiting me, and at that stage of the game, I wasn't ready to give either one of them up. I wanted to play both, and I was probably, looking back at it now, I was probably naive to think that I could play two sports in college, but I wanted to try and do that. So that was the more difficult decision between the two. Once I got drafted in hockey and then again in baseball, then it really became, do I want to take a chance and go play baseball versus going to college? Hockey, it's a different situation. They own your rights for a longer period of time, so they're really not in a hurry to sign you. They're anticipating you going to college. So that was it. Whereas with the Braves, it was from the minute I got the phone call, a push to sign me and get me into the minor league. So, that was the bigger decision. Do I want to take a chance on baseball and give up a college scholarship, which was a big deal? And ultimately, I felt like being drafted where I was, and ultimately the signing bonus that I got from the Braves, all that seemed to make sense and make it the right time for me to try and make that or make that leap and take that chance.
Now you get in the minor leagues, you progress pretty quickly. By 88, you're in the rotation regularly, but you were 7-17. But then the next year you're 14-8, and 2 years after that you win the Cy Young. Was there a point where it all clicked for you and said, "Oh, I got it," or was it a progression over that couple of years?
It's a progression. After I lost 17 games that first year, it was obvious to me that the biggest thing I needed to work on was my command. I needed to throw more strikes. I needed to pitch ahead in the count more. And so that was what I set out to do that winter, was just work on my mechanics and work on throwing more strikes. I came back that next year and had a good year. Came back my third year and kind of took a step backwards again. But all the while, my command was getting better, my confidence was getting better. I think the thing that really clicked for me in '91 was I developed my changeup, and now I had that secondary pitch that I could trust. And I didn't really have that up to that point in time. Even though my command was getting better, I still didn't have that second pitch that I could go to either get an out when I needed it or throw it behind in the count and get an out when I needed it. And once I added that along with my command, that's when things kind of started to take off. And really from that point in time, what it did was it having better command and ultimately having that secondary pitch, what it really enabled me to do was win games when I wasn't very good. Up until that point in time, if I had all my stuff, then I could win. The reality is you don't have all your stuff most of the time, so you better figure out how to win when you're missing a good fastball or good command or good movement, whatever the case may be. And I think that better command and that secondary pitch really allowed me to learn how to pitch games or win games when I really didn't have my best stuff.
So in '91, you win the Cy Young. The Braves go from worst to first. Was there a point in that season where you and your teammates knew, okay, we've got it? That it's not just we're in front in May. It's that we're a good team and we know it.
Yeah, I think so. It was funny because it was a little bit of a roller coaster. I remember getting a call from the PR folks sometime in May of that year that it was a big deal that we were in first place for the first time that late in the season in I don't know how many years. So it was a big deal. And there was a little bit of a buzz certainly around Atlanta. Played okay from that point on, and then kind of hit a little lull going into the All-Star break. And I think at the All-Star break, I don't know exactly, but I know we lost either 4 or 5 in a row or 5 out of 7, that kind of thing. And we went from a couple games out of first place to 6 or 7 games out of first place. So at that point in time, there's a little bit of that, here it comes, And I remember coming out of the break, I remember sitting there in the clubhouse and Bobby came in and addressed the team and his message was essentially, look, we're 1 good week away from getting back in this thing, so let's go out there and have a good first week after the All-Star break and let's get something going. Sure enough, we came out of the break and won 7 in a row. I think the Dodgers lost 7 in a row, and from that point on, I think that was when we really started to believe, hey, we really got a chance to win this thing, and from there it just kind of kept going.
I've heard you say that it would have been obviously Storybrooke if you had won Game 7 in '91. Clearly one of the best World Series ever. Is it possible to rank how '91 compares with the other 4 years that the Braves were so dominant? Was that the most special time for you?
Yeah, '91 was the most fun. Certainly '95 with it ending in a World Championship was a ton of fun and certainly the ultimate feeling in terms of what you play for. But yeah, like I've said, if you're talking about writing a Hollywood script, then '91 would have been the year that we would have won. Because it was just the electricity in the city, the excitement around the ballpark, the atmosphere in the ballpark. I mean, all of it was unbelievable and something that I don't think any of us envisioned, but as the season went on, it just kept getting bigger and bigger. I mean, it was just a tidal wave of emotion and support that just kind of enveloped the city. And you walk into that ballpark every night, and it was magical. I mean, it was intimidating for the other teams to come in there and see how loud it was, and the tomahawk chop and the whole 9 yards. I mean, it was crazy, but. the only bad thing to it, like I say, was it didn't end the way that we wanted it to ultimately. But it was such a fun year. Really put baseball back on the map in Atlanta, and really created the atmosphere for all those years afterwards. Not only the expectations we had of ourselves as a team to win, but also the excitement in the city that, hey, every year we got a team that these guys got a chance to win every year.
I want to ask you about '94 and your role in the labor issues that year. You became, in many ways, the face of the union that summer. And yet now, 20 years later, all that acrimony is gone. And what we're left with is the longest stretch of labor peace since the union came to be. And everybody seems to agree that this system is working. Do you take pride in what you and your fellow union members were able to accomplish in '94 in that period?
After '94, yes. 94 was tough. To ultimately go on strike, to lose a postseason. None of that was easy. But from our standpoint, we believed in what we were fighting for. We believed there was a better system than what was being proposed at that time. True to the players' union form, the guys stuck together and they remained strong, and we kept fighting and ultimately got a deal that was, certainly not everything we wanted, but much better than what was being proposed. So, that was a big step, and I think, quite honestly, that was a big step in terms of the relationship moving forward. I don't know that any of us really thought about that at the time, but I can tell you in subsequent bargaining years, a lot of the discussion, aside from the issues that we were trying to hammer out, a lot of the discussions were, hey, look, we can't have a '94 again. We can't do that again, And so I think in a strange way, maybe that was a good thing long term, because I think it hung over everybody's head, players and owners, that, hey, we don't want to go down that road again. We don't want to do that to the game. We don't want to do that to the fans. And so I think in some way it has had an impact on the relationship moving forward from that point in time. And you're right. Who would have thought, after 1994, where seemingly every year there was a labor contract that was up, there was a work stoppage. Now here we are 20 plus years later, and it's the most stable sport in the business. So yeah, I take pride in that. I feel like I had played a part in that, from the standpoint of, initially not only representing my team and the players as well as I could, and standing up for what we thought was right, but then moving forward in subsequent bargaining years, knowing that, hey, we really got to try and find a way to make this thing work, and avoid a work stoppage, and really try to get this whole relationship thing going in the right direction, so we're not doing this every 4 or 6 years. And I think I had a small part in that, and I'm happy to see that baseball has the relationship that it has now between the owners and the players.
And so the next year, the Braves win it all. And you're on the mound for Game 6 against probably the best hitting club in baseball. You allow 1 hit over 8 innings. Can you describe your thoughts when Marquise Grissom catches that last ball and the game ends? What are you thinking? Is it just pure euphoria?
It was one of those moments where you hear people talk about when they get into a scary situation, a life-threatening situation where their life flashes before their eyes. It was similar to that. Even though the amount of time it took from that ball to leave that bat and nestle in Marquise Grissom's glove was really not all that long, so many thoughts go through your mind as you're watching that ball. And a lot of it is what you've been through in that current year. A lot of it was the disappointments of '91, '92, '93, getting close, not winning. Now here we are in '95 with largely the same cast of characters, a lot of the same guys who've been through the disappointments. And it's just that feeling of satisfaction of not only erasing those disappointments to some extent, but the satisfaction of knowing that, hey, we went to spring training in February like every team, like you do every year, and this was our goal, and man, here we are, and we're the only team doing it. And that satisfaction of knowing that all the work and all the time you put in since the middle of February has led you to that moment, and that's what you play for. And it was just an unbelievably gratifying experience to have those feelings, and then ultimately be able to run out in the field, like I've always said, and jump around like a bunch of 12-year-olds. So I mean, there's no better feeling than that. I mean, that's you know, it is a cliche, obviously, and you know, maybe people roll their eyes when guys say it, but really there's nothing better than running out in that field when that last out is made and you're running around, jumping around, and you're world champions. I mean, it's really hard to explain to people, I guess, but I mean, I guess it's similar to any walk of life. When you set a goal and it's a lofty goal and you achieve it, that feeling of satisfaction and pride that, oh my gosh, we just did this, it's pretty good in all walks of life.
Did you ask Bobby to go back out for the ninth?
No, I knew I was done. I'd obviously pitched a good game up to that point in time, and we had a fairly lengthy seventh inning. And when I went back out for the eighth inning, I had a tougher time getting loose than I did up to that point in time. And the 3 outs that I got in that inning, although it was a relatively easy inning in terms of pitch count and a 1-2-3 inning, there were 2 outs that I got away with. One of them in particular was a fly ball that Jim Thome hit in the left center field that somebody caught on the warning track that that was that close to being a big mistake. So I knew I wasn't as crisp, I wasn't as sharp, and as much as you might say to yourself, oh man, I want to be out there in the ninth inning for the World Championship game, I knew honestly that me for the ninth inning and the 4th time through the lineup probably was a little less daunting of a task than Mark Wohlers coming out of the bullpen for 1 inning throwing 95, 96 miles an hour.
Now, about the postseason, you started 35 postseason games in your career, 218 innings. That's another season.
Another season, yeah.
Is what you pitched. Do you think we'll ever see another team like the Braves who are so consistently excellent? For you to pitch 35 games, you guys are in the playoffs all the time. Yeah,
I don't know that you'll see another team do it. You might see guys, individual guys that have those starts and those innings if they find themselves in the right situations and they're playing on playoff teams repeatedly. To think that you'll have, a team where you have a player like myself and Greg and John and start looking at the amount of postseason innings those guys had, largely all with one team. I don't know that you'll find that anymore. Obviously in today's game, with the extra playoff teams, you would think it would be a little bit easier. It's not. I mean, it's hard to get to the playoffs. It's hard to get there every year. And I think in this day and age of economics being what they are and teams having to manage their rosters largely on what makes sense economically, it's going to be tougher and tougher for teams to keep their core together like we were able to do in Atlanta. And I think that makes it tougher. And there's no magic formula. You look at the teams that spend the most money year in and year out, and they're not always getting to the postseason all the time. They're not always getting deep into the postseason all the time. So it's, there really is much more of a balance in the game of baseball today than there seemed to be even a few years ago. And I think that makes it tougher for teams to do what we did. And I think it's, those 14 straight division titles and all those postseasons and whatnot, I'm fairly confident, although I hesitate to ever say never. I think that's something that you're going to be really hard-pressed to see anybody do ever again.
Except for 94, when the season was shortened. Every year from 88 to 07, you started at least 29 games. You're starting many times 32, 33 games. Was your arm strength a gift, or was it something that you built up over time to be that consistently healthy to do that?
I think it was both. I was blessed, no question about it. I mean, I had my share of injuries, just thankfully nothing until I got deep into my career, my last year of my career, nothing that required me to go on the disabled list or have surgery. It was always stuff that I could pitch through. But part of it, part of it was being blessed and being lucky. I mean, I had some issues early in my career. I had a partial tear of my rotator cuff, I think in 92. But thankfully it was the kind of thing that I didn't have to have surgery, and as long as I could deal with the pain, then I could continue to pitch. And it took me a couple of years to get back to where I felt like I had my strength and my velocity back. But again, that was one of those things that was long-term was a good lesson for me, because up until that point in time, I was probably a little sporadic with taking care of myself in season, taking care of my shoulder, my arm, and all that stuff. And when I was going through that, I had to do it. It was a necessity, and then it became one of those things that became more of a habit for me and more a part of my routine. And I think long term, that was a big help for me, learning how to take better care of myself in season, take better care of my shoulder, my elbow, and do those kinds of things. And then, part of it beyond that is just a little bit of luck. A lot of guys take care of themselves, but they have a tough time staying healthy. I think a lot of it for me was my pitching style, my delivery. I think all those things certainly helped me to stay healthy, but none of it was a guarantee. I think as much as anything, I think I was just blessed by the good Lord that I stayed relatively healthy.
At the end, you made 682 starts. All your appearances were starts. But at the end, did you consider, hey, I could probably extend my career for 3 or 4 years by being a situational lefty, or did that never enter in your mind?
No, it never occurred to me. When I came back after having my shoulder and elbow fixed in '08 and trying to play one more year and ultimately didn't get back to the big leagues, it was the kind of thing where I had a couple of teams kind of kicking the tires, but for me, I knew that physically my arm was at a point where it was probably at the end of the rope, I think more than anything, I wanted to pitch one more year in '09 because I didn't want my career to end because my arm hurt and I couldn't pitch anymore. But even with that, realistically, had I gotten back to the big leagues, I didn't know if I was going to make it for a month or 2 months or for the rest of the year. So once that was over, no, it was. I think it was fairly easy to see the writing on the wall that, you've gotten as much out of this left arm as you're probably going to get out of it, so there's no need to push it anymore.
As a pitcher, what pitchers did you like competing against the most?
Man, in those days, Randy Johnson was always fun. Kevin Brown, Pedro Martinez, the upper echelon guys. Those were the guys that brought the most out of you. As much as when you get into those matchups and everybody wants to talk leading up to it that, hey, you're facing Randy Johnson, what are you going to have to do? What's that going to be like? And we always downplay it because it is true. You're not facing that guy. You're facing their lineup, but in the back of your mind that guy you're going up against is probably not going to give your lineup too many opportunities and too many chances. So you better be on your game. And it forces you to pitch a little bit differently. When you're facing somebody that you figure, hey, we're going to get 3 or 4 runs off of this guy, so if I give up 1 or 2, we're probably going to win 4-2. You have a little bit different mindset. You might have a situation where it's 2nd and 3rd in the 1st inning, and you're thinking, well, I'll trade him out for a run right here. Let's keep away from a big inning, and we're going to score some runs, that kind of thing. But when you're facing a Randy Johnson or a Pedro Martinez on the other side, you're thinking, we may not get 1 run, so I got to do everything I can not to let those guys score. So you pitch a little bit more with maybe some desperation early in the game, trying to prevent runs from scoring more so than trying to manage innings sometimes. So it does change your game plan a little bit, but ultimately it's just that challenge of the last thing you wanted when the game was over is come in the clubhouse and explain why so-and-so outpitched you. You didn't want to have that conversation.
Did you enjoy the fact that, Johnson and Pedro, they're throwing these 98-mile-an-hour balls that are just absolutely look unhittable. You're doing this in a different way, and it's kind of like, hey, I can do the same thing. It's just we're going to do it in a way that I'm going to do. Did that give you some enjoyment?
It did, but I think that's one of the beauties of baseball. There's more than one way to get something done. It's not really ever been a game that's defined by how hard do you throw or how big are you. There are always exceptions to the rule, and I think that's what makes baseball great. I think that's why people relate to baseball probably more than they do other sports, because it doesn't have that physically imposing something that you say to yourself, well, geez, I can't play football because I'm not 300 pounds, or I don't run like the wind, or I can't play basketball because I'm not 7 feet tall. With baseball, nobody says, well, you know, geez, I wasn't tall enough, so I didn't hit enough home runs. You know, you all think you can play because we've all played it at some point in time. So I think, you know, people relate to that, and that's part of what's fun, is that there is more than one way to get something done. Having said that, even though I did things differently than, say, a Pedro or a Randy Johnson, I had an appreciation for what those guys could do. You know, it was fun to watch a guy throw 95 miles an hour. It was, strangely enough, is not as good a hitter as I was. It was fun to get in the batter's box against those guys and try and get a hit and try and figure out what they were doing. But, you know, it was, you know, you see like a guy like Randy and you watch his progression as a pitcher. I have an appreciation for that. You know, you watch a guy like Pedro, and, you know, Pedro, and I had a chance to be his teammate for a few years. It's, you know, he's one of those guys that I really like, because not only did he throw hard, but he could throw it where he wanted to, and he could change speeds really well. And, you know, he, even though I think sometimes he, you know, he got a lot of credit for how hard he threw, I think if you really watched him, you'd have an appreciation for how he was able to locate and change speed. So, you know, it's the kind of thing that, yeah, are you envious sometimes, to where you say, man, I wish I could just stand here and say, here comes a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, big guy, try to hit it. But that wasn't my game. Instead, it was, here comes a 78-mile-an-hour changeup, see if you can hit it. So
I remember you winning a couple of Silver Sluggers, so I think you were getting some hits off those.
I was okay. I got
too.
my share. It was probably more because I was a good bunter than a good hitter.
Baseball has such a connection with family through the years. You got to play with your brother in 2003. Was that a special experience for you?
It was great. You know, it was great that the Mets did that. You know, certainly for me to have that opportunity with my brother, but also for him. And, you know, ultimately it was great that he got an opportunity to get a base hit, and he'll have that one base hit in the big league. So it was pretty cool. But yeah, it was funny. I remember it was I think my last start of the year that year, and he was starting at first base, and so, you know, my mom and dad were there, and my sister and brother, everybody was there to see it, because, you know, I mean, you don't get a chance to play with your brother in a big league game very often. And sure enough, second hitter of the game, I think it was Jason Kendall, hit a line drive right off my kneecap, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you know, finally get a chance to experience something like this, and I get hit in the shin, and I'm going to be out of here. And I said, there's no way I'm coming out of this game. So, sure. And my brother came over, and he said the same thing. He said, you are not coming out of this game. So I got through it, and sure enough, I think an inning or two later, same thing. I got hit in the other leg. So it was like one of those nicer. It's like, oh my God, you finally get this opportunity, and, you know, you're out here getting killed with line drives. But no, it was fun. It was a fun experience, not only for me and for him, but certainly for my mom and dad as well.